Station Kepler-7's lower districts had taught Zara three fundamental truths by the time she was 8. Food was currency, visibility was danger, and kindness would get you killed. She'd learned these lessons through observation, watching other orphans share their meager resources and starve together, watching the visible ones get conscripted by gangs or authorities, watching the kind ones get exploited until they learned better or died. So when she found the woman bleeding in the ventilation access corridor, Zara's first instinct was to walk away. Injured people attracted hunters, and hunters killed anyone nearby just to eliminate witnesses. But the woman looked up at her with desperate eyes and said in broken standard, "Please, they're hunting me. I just need somewhere to hide." Zara was 8, starving, holding a ration pack she'd stolen that was supposed to last 3 days. Every survival instinct said to run. Instead, she split the ration pack in half, handed it to the stranger and said, "Follow me." The ventilation shafts in the lower districts were where Zara hid when the gang enforcers came through looking for orphans to conscript. They were cramped, dark, and most adults couldn't fit through them. This woman barely made it, leaving blood on the metal as Zara pulled her through. They stayed there for 6 hours while armed hunters searched below, asking people if they'd seen a woman with luminescent skin markings. Zara kept the stranger quiet, sharing the rest of her food when the woman started shaking from blood loss and shock. "Thank you," the woman whispered when the hunters finally left. "You saved my life. May I know your name?" "Don't have one that matters," Zara said, because the name her parents gave her had stopped meaning anything when they died. "Just stay here till morning. They won't search the same area twice." "I'm a merchant," the woman said. "I witnessed a murder. They want me dead for it." Zara didn't believe her. The luminescent markings suggested something more important than merchant, but lying was a survival strategy she understood. "Good luck, then." She left before the woman could say anything else, because attachment was another thing that got you killed. That was 27 years ago. The contract came through standard channels. Close protection for Empress Velsarin of the Kevari Dominion during treaty negotiations on Nexus Prime. Duration: 2 weeks. Payment: enough to fund Zara's next year without taking questionable contracts in war zones. Zara accepted immediately. Royal protection was easy work. Stand in the right positions, look dangerous, intervene if someone tried to kill the client. She'd done it 100 times. The security screening was thorough. Retinal scan, genetic markers, full background verification. Zara submitted to all of it with practiced patience. Mercenaries who worked high-level contracts got used to invasive security protocols. The palace was excessive. All crystalline architecture and ceremonial fountains, the kind of opulence that made Zara think about how many orphans could be fed with the budget for one decorative water feature. But judging client excess was bad for business, so she kept her opinions to herself and focused on memorizing sight lines and threat vectors. The formal presentation was pure pageantry. All hired security standing in formation while the Empress acknowledged their presence and formally accepted them into her protection detail. Zara stood in position, face neutral, waiting for the ceremony to end so she could start actual work. Empress Velsarin entered the throne room with the absolute confidence of someone who'd ruled for decades. Tall, elegant, with luminescent skin markings that identified Kevari royalty, moving through the formal greeting protocol with practiced ease. She began acknowledging the security detail, her eyes scanning across them with polite disinterest until she reached Zara. She stopped mid-sentence, completely frozen. The court went silent, confused by the break in protocol. Velsarin stared at Zara with an expression that cycled through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like grief. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. I know you." Zara's threat assessment went active. Was this a trap? Had she accidentally stumbled into factional politics? But the Empress's expression wasn't hostile, it was devastated. Velsarin dismissed the court with abrupt authority, ordering everyone out except Zara and her most trusted advisor. The court evacuated with barely concealed confusion, and suddenly Zara was alone with the empress and one very nervous-looking Kevari official. "Station Kepler 7, Velsarin said, approaching Zara directly, ignoring every protocol about maintaining distance from hired security. 32 years ago, lower districts, a child who shared their food with a stranger and hid them from hunters, that was you." Zara's memories of childhood were fragmented, eroded by years of violence and survival, but the Empress's words triggered something. A woman with luminescent markings, bleeding, terrified. A ration pack split in half. Ventilation shafts where she'd hidden someone bigger than her, telling them to stay quiet while hunters searched below. "You were running from assassins," Zara said slowly, memory crystallizing. "You had a wound in your side. You told me you were a merchant who'd witnessed a murder." "I lied," Velsarin said. "I was an exiled princess fleeing my uncle's coup. The assassins were his agents. I was trying to reach loyalist forces in the outer system. I would have died without you." Zara processed this information with the clinical detachment of someone trained to assess threats. "You survived, obviously. I reached my allies. We retook the throne. I spent 3 years consolidating power and the next 29 searching for you." Velsarin's voice cracked. "I searched every record, every station registry, sent investigators to Kepler 7 a dozen times. But the child had no name in any system, no genetic record. You'd vanished." "I was recruited by Mercenary Corps when I was 12, Zara said flatly. "They don't keep records of real names or origins. Bad for business. I became Zara Cade because it sounded like someone who wouldn't die easily." "The biometric scan when you arrived. It flagged genetic markers consistent with survivors from Kepler 7's lower districts during the relevant time period." Velsarin stepped closer. "I had my security chief run additional verification. Your genetic signature matches fragmented records from the station's orphan population census." She gestured at Zara, at the scars, the augmentations, the weapons, the flat expression of someone who'd killed more people than they remembered. "I have spent 3 decades searching for you, and you became this, a hired soldier, a weapon." "It's good work if you're good at it," Zara said because she didn't know what else to say. "I owe you my life, my throne. My entire lineage exists because you shared a ration pack you couldn't afford to share. Then we're even. You're paying me extremely well for this contract." Velsarin looked like Zara had just slapped her. "Even. You think payment for 2 weeks of security work equals a life debt that spans 30 years. I think debts are complicated and I'm here to do a job. If there's a problem with my service record, I can recommend other contractors." "There's no problem with your service record," the Empress said, and now she sounded angry. "There's a problem with the fact that the child who saved my life became exactly what systems like mine create, weapons forged from abandoned human potential." Zara had nothing to say to that. The Empress insisted on private meetings that made the rest of the security detail nervous. Velsarin wanted to understand what had happened, how the compassionate child became the hardened mercenary. Zara told her because refusing seemed pointless. After helping the bleeding woman, Zara had continued surviving the only way orphans on Kepler 7 could: stealing, scavenging, staying invisible. At 12, she'd been caught stealing food and given a choice: conscription into a mercenary training program or prison. She chose the former because mercenaries got fed regularly. The training was brutal. Children turned into weapons through violence and conditioning that rewarded cruelty and punished hesitation. Empathy was weakness. Attachment was liability. Survival meant becoming someone who could kill without hesitation and sleep without nightmares. Zara had been very good at becoming that person. By 16, she was taking contracts. By 20, she had a reputation. By 35, she was expensive enough that only governments and corporations could afford her. "And in all those years, did no one offer you something better?" Velsarin asked. Better than what? I'm good at this. It pays well. I'm still alive. That's more than most orphans from Kepler-7 can say. I could have offered you sanctuary, education, a life that wasn't violence. You didn't know where I was. And even if you'd found me at 12 or 16 or 20, what would you have offered? Palace position. Charity from someone I helped once when I was 8. Zara's voice was flat. I learned early that survival is the only thing you can rely on, not sanctuary, not kindness, survival. Velsarin looked stricken. I created this. By surviving, by reclaiming my throne, I created the circumstances that turned you into a weapon. The instability in the outer regions, the mercenary economy, the systems that chew up orphans and spit out soldiers. My government perpetuates all of it. That's not on you. Systems existed before you, they'll exist after. I made my choices. You were 8 years old when we met. 12 when you were conscripted. Those aren't choices, they're survival reflexes in a system designed to exploit desperation. The Empress's frustration was obvious. I want to repay the debt. I want to offer you something better than contracts and violence. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's a debt. Debts must be honored in Kevari culture. It's fundamental to who we are. Then honor it by letting it go, Zara said. I don't need saving. I'm exactly what I chose to become. No, you're what circumstances forced you to become. There's a difference. The treaty negotiations continued while this tension simmered beneath everything. Zara did her job with professional efficiency, identified threats, coordinated security responses, prevented 3 separate assassination attempts with brutal competence that made the Empress flinch. After the 3rd incident, where Zara killed 2 attackers with casual efficiency that suggested she'd done it 1,000 times before, Velsarin confronted her in private. Does it bother you, the killing? Number should it? The child who helped me would have been bothered. That child died on Kepler-7. I'm what survived. Velsarin's expression was grief mixed with something like rage, not at Zara, but at circumstances that created soldiers out of children who once knew how to be kind. The final assassination attempt was coordinated, professional, and targeted both the Empress and Zara specifically. Someone had figured out their connection and decided eliminating Velsarin's best protection while killing her would send a clear message. The attack happened during the treaty signing ceremony. Maximum witnesses, maximum political impact. Zara responded with 23 years of trained reflex, putting herself between the Empress and the plasma weapon that should have vaporized the royal skull. The burn caught her in the same side where Velsarin had been wounded 32 years ago when a child found her bleeding. Zara registered the hit, confirmed the Empress was safe, and continued neutralizing threats until security eliminated the remaining attackers. She stayed conscious long enough to verify the Empress was unharmed, then collapsed. She woke in medical facilities with Velsarin sitting beside her, which violated about a dozen security protocols. The Empress's eyes were red like she'd been crying, which seemed excessive for hired security taking a hit. You saved my life again, Velsarin said. Just doing my job. No, you threw yourself in front of a weapon meant for me. That's not contract terms, she stopped. That's what you did 32 years ago, putting yourself in danger for a stranger. Zara wanted to argue that it was different, that she was paid to take hits now, that it wasn't kindness, just professional competence. But Velsarin was looking at her like she could see through 3 decades of survival conditioning to the child who once shared food she couldn't afford to share. Why did you do it? The Empress asked quietly. Back then, on Kepler-7. You were starving. That ration pack was supposed to last you days. Why give half to a stranger? Zara didn't have a good answer. You looked like you needed it more. And today, you could have let me take that hit. Collected your payment from my heir, moved on to the next contract. That's not how I work. I take contracts seriously. Even when it means dying for someone you resent. I don't resent you. It came out more honest than Zara intended. I just don't know what you want from me. You want me to be the child I was, and I can't be that. She didn't survive. I survived. And maybe I'm not who you wanted to find, but I'm who exists." Velsarin was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "I wanted to give you the life you deserved. The life you would have had if systems were just and children didn't have to choose between starvation and military conscription. I wanted to repay a debt that shaped my entire existence." She met Zara's eyes. "But you're right. That child is gone. So I'm asking you, Zara Cade, mercenary weapon survivor, what would honor what you did?" Zara considered this. Really considered it, not with the reflexive dismissal she'd been using, but with genuine thought about what she actually wanted. "Change the systems that create kids like me," she said finally. "The ones who have to choose between survival and humanity. Make it so the next orphan on Kepler-7 doesn't have to decide whether sharing food means dying." She looked at Velsarin directly. "You want to repay a debt. Stop creating soldiers out of children. That's how you honor what I did." The Empress stared at her, and something shifted in her expression, grief transforming into determination. That would take decades. Systemic reform across multiple sectors, fighting entrenched interests, rebuilding economic structures. Then you have a project that matches the scale of your debt. And you, what will you do? Finish this contract. Move on to the next one. Or, Velsarin said carefully, you could stay. Not as charity, not as sanctuary, but as my security chief and strategic advisor. Someone who understands what systems like mine create and can help me dismantle them. You want to hire me to help reform your government. I want to partner with someone who survived what my systems created and has perspective I lack. You understand violence, survival, the realities of the outer regions. You also once understood compassion enough to help a stranger when you had nothing. Maybe both things can exist in one person." Zara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance that had kept her alive for decades. But she was tired, a tiredness that had nothing to do with the plasma burn and everything to do with 23 years of surviving without purpose beyond the next contract. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "Agreed," Velsarin replied. "But 32 years ago, a child made a terrible decision to help a stranger instead of preserving resources. That decision changed everything. Maybe this one will too." Zara accepted, not because she believed in redemption or any idealistic concept that had been beaten out of her decades ago, but because the Empress was offering something that wasn't charity. She was offering purpose. A chance to make the systems that created Zara Cade obsolete, so the next desperate child didn't have to learn that survival meant forgetting how to be human. 6 months later, Zara stood in a strategy meeting reviewing economic reforms for the outer regions. Velsarin's administration was implementing changes to eliminate the exploitation economies that fed the mercenary trade, improving station infrastructure, creating educational opportunities, establishing protections for orphaned children. It was slow, frustrating work that would take decades to show results. Entrenched interests fought every reform. Political opponents called it idealistic waste. Velsarin's approval ratings dropped as she prioritized long-term systemic change over immediate political gains. But the Empress was relentless, driven by a debt she finally understood how to honor. And Zara, who'd spent 23 years as a weapon, found herself doing something she'd never expected, building instead of destroying. Using her understanding of violence to prevent it, her knowledge of exploitation to dismantle it, her survival instincts to help others survive without becoming what she'd become. She still took security contracts. Old habits and skills didn't disappear, but now with purpose beyond payment. Now protecting someone working to change the systems that had created them both. The Empress who'd survived to rule, and the child who'd survived to become a weapon. One evening, reviewing reports from Kepler-7 about new educational facilities being built in the lower districts, Velsarin asked, "Do you think she would approve, the child you were?" Zara thought about the 8-year-old who'd shared food she couldn't afford to share, who'd hidden a stranger despite the danger, who'd believed helping someone was worth the risk. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That child died learning that kindness was a luxury, but maybe this," she gestured at the reforms, the slow work of systemic change, "maybe this is what she would have wanted if she'd survived. A galaxy where the next desperate kid doesn't have to make